we're going to get started with an exercise, though, is how I thought we would start off. So if you have your notepads, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you just to write down a couple journal questions, and you can also write them out in the chat box. And I do have prizes if you do participate, so just be aware of that. What I'm going to ask you first and foremost is just a little check-in question. So I just want you to tell me, when you think about money and finances today, your money and your finances today, how do you feel? You can either write that in the chat box or you can write it in your journal. I'll just give you a moment to answer some of these. When you think about money and your finances today, how do you feel? Hesitantly hopeful. Michelle and Scarlett, you're each getting, because you were the first two brave people to write in the chat, you're each getting one of my money clips. It says MMXX, that's the year 2020 in Roman numerals, the year that you changed your financial picture. So I will connect with both of you, Michelle and Scarlett, to mail those to you. I don't know which address of yours you want me to mail yours to, Scarlett in Hollywood, or maybe one of your other homes, but you can let me know. So Scarlett feels like she has a long way to go. Taz says grateful. Oh, sorry, Taz. I'll send you one too. I apologize. You were first. You're right. And Michelle says hesitantly hopeful. And The Rock also feels hopeful. This is good. I think this is why you're here, because you are feeling hopeful. So you've shown up for yourself today. So Michelle, are you comfortable sharing with us? Are you comfortable opening up your microphone and telling us a little bit about what you mean?
Well, of course, yes, 2020 is going to bring a lot of financial changes, and hopefully everything can just be positive from here.
Okay, good. Okay.
Being really restricted, it's a great exercise and time to learn. So.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you. I love that. Okay, here's your next question. If you could turn back time, like Cher, what would you teach your 18-year-old self about money? So you have this opportunity to go back and talk to yourself. You're now 18 years old. What do you wish that you knew? What would you tell yourself? Keep saving everything. It isn't free, even when they make it sound like it is. That's so good. Save for retirement. Credit cards are not the answer. How to save, and that what I have doesn't make me belong. I love that. How to save, what accounts to open. Taz would say build your emergency plan and start that side hustle ASAP. Okay, let's go to Rebecca. Rebecca, are you comfortable unmuting right now and tell us, what do you mean by it isn't free even when they make it sound like it is?
There we go. I think I've got it figured out now that I know what time zone I'm meant to be in.
Rebecca, high five, because she's all the way out in Ontario and she's here. It's like 9 o'clock your time. Look at you.
It is. Yeah, so I got my first credit card in my frosh week way back in college. And by the time I was 22, maybe, my husband and I were doing a $25,000 consolidation loan, because every time we went to the bank, somebody said to us, here's money, do you want a line of credit? You know, your credit card limit has been exceeded. And yeah, we just didn't have a very solid financial base to understand what all of that meant. And we were fine until we weren't fine anymore. And so if you had asked 20-year-old me, would I work in the financial industry, I would have laughed and said, absolutely not. But grateful for those experiences, because it helps me relate to clients also.
Amazing. Okay, everybody give me a wave if you got your credit card when you were in, like, right after high school and you felt so grown up. Anybody? Were you like, this is amazing? Yes, right? Why is that? That's so weird, isn't it? It's like, this is the thing that you're going to come to hate 20, 30 years from now if you're like a typical North American. But in the moment, like, you get it, it feels like power, doesn't it? Okay, so here's my next question for you. We're going to time travel for a minute. I want you to imagine now that you're 98 years old and you are face to face sitting across the table with you today. But at 98 years old, you know, you have the wisdom of knowing that you figured this out and you mastered this and you were actually able to take care of your finances and feel the way you want to feel about them. What would you say to today you in order to help you through this time in your life right now? With the wisdom of your 98-year-old self, what would you say? Whoa, got real quiet. And that's the angle we're going to come at today from, because it's really hard when we're in the moment to see the choices that we're making. But see, when we went back and we talked to our 18-year-old selves, we had all of this wisdom that we didn't have when we were 18, right? Now you're an expert on how you should be 18. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend we're 98 and we're going to be an expert on how we need to be today. So here's your last journal question before we get to some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. Tell me, how do you want to feel about your finances? Describe to me how you want to feel about money, how you want to feel about retirement, how you want to feel about anything relating to your wallet. Tell me all the things. Positive, proud, peaceful, abundant, at peace. Everybody has the word abundant here. Abundant and peaceful. We're like rich hippies is what we are here today. No stress and abundance, comfortable, secure. Beautiful. These are beautiful words. So I want you to keep these in mind as we're going through what we're talking about tonight. And I want you to pretend that you are 98 years old and this has already happened for you. You are feeling, in your little old age, you are feeling secure and comfortable and peaceful and abundant. Okay. So I want you to sort of come at it like that. And then as you go through the next week or so, when you come up against financial stress, I want you to put yourself in your 98-year-old body and try and approach whatever you're feeling in terms of your frustration or your struggle or whatever it is that you're coming up against financially from that perspective. Can you do that for me? Can you pinky swear? Let me see. You pinky swear. Okay. We're going to give that a go. Okay, well, I am so excited today because we're with a couple of super cool people that I just love in this industry. And I'm going to introduce you to one of the funniest guys ever, which is weird because in the financial industry, let me tell you, I know some of you work in financial services. There's not a lot of funny people that work in money. Like they tend to be. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like if you don't have a personality, your high school guidance counselor pushes you into this line of work, right? But somehow we got Shawn Stack in this industry, and he's not only funny, but he's super brilliant, and he is kind, and he gets it, and he's compassionate. And so we want to welcome you, Shawn, and thank you for being here to host this with me.
Totally my pleasure. I wish I would have had a joke lined up.
I'm not going to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
What tell everybody like what it is you do. How would you describe what you do day to day?
What my title in the community is called now is a licensed insolvency trustee, and that was something that was a bit of a rebranding exercise by the government actually, because traditionally my role would be called a bankruptcy trustee, but bankruptcy is hardly something that's used anymore, and of course nobody wants to ever deal with a bankruptcy trustee, and the very thought of the word bankruptcy kind of keeps everybody at bay. So really what I do every day, most when you're a trustee, you would operate either, not either, but traditionally you would sort of specialize, even though you're not supposed to talk about specializing, but you would choose a particular place you would work in, either corporate restructuring or personal. And so myself, I work strictly in personal restructuring. So I assist people to kind of make an inventory of where they're at now. Look at sort of what their options are and actually choose a position moving forward. Because what I think, Erin, we forget is that, or we tend to define ourselves by what our history is. Like, so in fact, the exercise you said was terrific, right? Where you said, where you're at 18, we have this history leading up, 10 years in your case, 30 in mine. And what happens is, you get to here, and you do have to envision yourself at 98, right? And so we're not our history. We're actually what our intentionalities are towards the future. And so what we really do is help people kind of see where you're at now, and then focus on that intentionality towards the future.
Yes. Don't you find that that's usually what happens though when people show up? They are oftentimes lost in the past. Part of it is breaking them through to that new future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is, An analogy that I will often use is, if imagine that you're walking on a lake, and the lake is frozen, of course, and then you hear it crack, right? First off, you don't want to move. Like, that's the very first thing. You just stop and you listen, right? And then you just don't want to do anything. And then you're actually like, why did I even come out this way? And you want to kind of go backwards. But life is lived through the rear view mirror. We move forward and we can't see, and we learn from what our past mistakes are. And they're not even mistakes, our past journeys. And when everything cracks, really what you want to do is you don't want to move, or you want to just move frantically. And really what you should do is you should take stock of where you're at and what you're in relation to. So one of the things the very first thing is, don't panic. That's the number one thing. Don't panic. The first option everyone has when they're faced with financial difficulty, and it's arguably the most important, Erin, do nothing. Now, that doesn't mean put your head in the sand, but it literally means just slow down, stop, take stock of where you're at. And that's a lot of that is what the conversation that we're focused around. And then, of course, moving, helping someone understand what the options are to get off of the proverbial lake, so to speak.
Well, I think it's so true, because people will often, when they come to, I teach a course on helping people become debt free. It's an education-based course, very different than what you do, but we work in the same field.
Yeah.
What often happens is, before they come to me, they feel like they have to have done something. So they'll be like, I just consolidate all my credit cards, and I'm like, whoa, no, wait, did you sign anything? Don't do anything yet. Like, just hold on, right? But it's such human nature when we are feeling lost to feel like I have to do something in order to make something happen. And sometimes, especially when it comes to changing an old pattern, we just have to we got to sit and be, and like you say, take stock. That's such a great example of, be like, let's really look at what's happening here, because how we got into the situation differs human to human. And so there isn't one answer. Tracy's finances and Brenda's finances and Tara's finances are completely different in terms of how they got to where they are, and how they're going to get out of it is going to be completely different too. So to scramble around and just try and do anything can often make things worse than just holding still for a moment.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as well, just to speak to that, I think sometimes our nature is such that we want to say, this is what I've done, is it the right thing? And sometimes it's actually like, the best thing is actually, this is what the situation is. Can we discuss what the right thing is? Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so we've had some questions come in. So if you are on this call and you have any questions about debt, or you want to talk about the situation that you're in now, or you just want some sort of guidance on something, you are totally welcome to ask. You can type it in the chat box here. You can text, if you scroll all the way up to the very top, you can text me directly, and then I'll ask your question directly, but I'll do it anonymously if you prefer it be anonymous. And we did have a few questions come in already over email. You probably got the email that I sent out today. If you have a question that you prefer answered anonymously and email is your only option, you can totally also ask me via email as well. Okay, so the questions that came in were mostly about insolvency. Can you explain what, so let's say people are trying to pay off their debt. They're in my course, they're in the Get the Hell Out of Debt course, and we've taken stock of everything and we figured out, we might actually be insolvent. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, for sure. So it's basically, it's a fancy word for not solvent. That's a rim shot there. That's the comedy. So it's unable to hold water. And so what it means, the strict definition, there's two of them, and it's not an either or, and it's not it is an either or, not an and. So one definition is the liquidation of the assets, so of the things you own, the liquidation of them are insufficient to pay off your liabilities, which is the people you owe money to. Now, what's important to understand about this is that in Canada, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, which is the federal legislation that addresses this, does not distinguish between a natural person and a corporate entity. So you're both the same. So a natural person could be solvent by definition of liquidation of their assets, except some of those assets are out of reach of the creditor. So for example, pensions and RRSPs, right? So you could have, say, $50,000 in debt and $75,000 in RRSPs, and your inclination may be, well, hey, I shouldn't be able to keep my RRSPs. I'm gonna I should redeem these and pay this off. Well, we actually have laws around this to say, well, those RRSPs are exempt from your creditors, and the reason why we have these exemptions is so that the expression from the court, and it's not a particularly lovely expression, to be honest with you, but they say that the continued maintenance doesn't fall on society later on, right? So because one of the main principles here is that it's the rehabilitation of the individual to get them in a better place. So insolvent, by the definition of liquidation of assets, is mostly comes down to the sale of assets that would be available to the creditors. Now, I never recommend someone does this, and now the malls are empty, but if you go to a mall and you chuck a rock, you're going to hit someone who's insolvent. You're also going to get chased down by the mall police, and you're probably going to get in trouble. And if you say, I told you, I understand that this is recorded, and I understand that you can cut that piece out, and I'm going to...
Deal.
Okay, awesome. So usually the definition of insolvency, actually, how we would use it is, and it's interesting because it's a slight change of language. How a lot of people will say is that you're unable to pay your debts as they become due. Now, it's interesting because when you say unable, ability is it's an interesting thing that a lot of people make money arguing around, right? Words. So you could say, well, get a second job, get a third job, get a fourth job. You have the ability to do something like that. So the word is not you're unable to pay your debts as they become due. It's you're not paying your debts as they become due. Now that's an important consideration because as you take stock, you may be of the perspective, hey, I can keep this going. But what you got to think like, and this sounds absolutely ridiculous to say you need to think like a corporation. I'm not suggesting that we're all against one another as people, but a corporation will restructure or can apply to restructure and, under various different legislations if they can demonstrate that their competition arguably has a leg up on them, right? So they will become insolvent in the future because of this, and they're able to restructure that way. So what you need to be looking at is, as you're, the analogy back to the 98-year-old self is you need to be looking at it and saying, where do I want to be when I'm 98? Now, we might say to ourselves, I want to be debt free. Fair enough. Do you want to be asset rich? And perhaps rich it might be a bit far at this stage, but do you want to be asset sustainable, right? So the definition of insolvency, really, liquidation of assets or not paying your debts as they become due. And it's important to understand you can trigger that not paying the debts as they become due like that. That was a snap.
We got it. It was good.
Oh, perfect.
Good. Jasmine asked a great question. She says, so does that mean if we're struggling, we should not sell RSPs to try and make our bills? I'm going to answer it very bluntly and say no, but Shawn will have a much more intelligent answer and articulate answer for you.
Absolutely not. No, it's super important to understand. Sometimes what happens when we get into situations like this, we start to apply a weird sort, and I shouldn't say weird, but we apply a morality to something where it doesn't really belong. And this is going to sound crazy that there's morality and there's legality. And I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. I'd love to, but I'm sure that's not why I'm here. But the concept of what is right and what is legal, they are largely the same. But there's legality and then there's grace as well, right? And exemptions are by the grace of the state to say to the creditors, you don't get this. And so as a people, we tend to apply our moral perspectives in some of these things, and it can get us really confused where we say, well, I would want someone to pay my debt back, right, if I loan the money. And it's completely true, but a creditor that's loaning you money to make interest, they're fully aware of what all these rules are. It's not like if you talk to them, they're, like I can appreciate Erin, like and our guests this evening saying, hey, I'm not sure what this word insolvent means. I can assure you the people that are loaning money, they know precisely what insolvent means because it's put into their reckoning of what their earnings are coming down the road. So although we may have this desire and this urge to say, I want to redeem all this and make sure that I make my creditors whole, it's important that in making your creditors whole, you also keep your financial future whole, vis-a-vis the exemptions that you're entitled to.
Yeah, otherwise you're just sort of kicking the problem further down the field, right? Because nobody wants to think of somebody who is 98 years old not able to care for themselves. Like, that's a bigger problem we're creating in the future. So you are stuck in that morality thing. I want you to think of which is the bigger burden. Is the bigger burden today having to sort of restructure and renegotiate some of the debt you've had, or having to eat cat food at the age of an old age because you made some tougher decisions today? So I love that. I love the way you put it. Again, you are much more articulate than I am. Yvonne is asking, can a home be part of assets that the creditors can claim?
So, and that's a great question. So the exemptions that are in Alberta that you're entitled to, a home is one of them. Now, you have to be living in it, arguably. Again, everything's arguably. You will find by the end of this, I'll talk sometimes out of this side and sometimes out of this side, but all of it is going to be truthful. So a home, your principal residence, you're allowed a $40,000 exemption in the property, but that's adjusted to the pro rata share that you own. And so what that means is that with an exemption like a vehicle, you're allowed $5,000 equity. So you could own that and you could have it with someone else. With a home, it's not $40,000 for each person. Otherwise, what would happen is you would put your children on the home and then it would just, it would grow. So a home is exempt provided that you're living in the home, or there is some wiggle room in relation to that you're planning on moving back into the home. And equity, I don't want to super confuse this, but equity also enters into this weird nebulous, what is equity? So one way is value minus what's owing. The other one is value minus what's owing minus what the potential costs are. The important thing to understand here is that when we look at this concept of insolvency, you're unable to pay your debts, that's simply a state, right? So that's a state that gets changed either by a bankruptcy, or pardon me, by a sort of a white knight creditor coming in, buying everything out, or a bankruptcy, or more commonly a proposal, which is where we consider what the assets are. You never lose them. We consider them, we put it over here, we calculate kind of what would happen as far as attachment to income, and then we say, this is the amount of money that the creditors can expect versus settlement on them. And they have 45 days to say, hey, I want to have a meeting to talk about this.
Amazing. Okay. Question that you got earlier today. If a person has filed a consumer proposal and it has been accepted by the creditors, and then something changes, like you receive an unexpected CRA bill for $30,000, is there a time period where an amendment can be done? Yeah,
so that's a terrific question. So what's important to understand about with a proposal or even a bankruptcy, but we'll just say with a proposal, any debt that existed as at the date of the proposal or had the potential to exist as at that date would be included into it. So for example, if a CRA debt, if all of a sudden you're in a proposal and you've been assessed for a CRA debt now, well, that debt would have to predate I was going to say 2019, but it's 2020. I should get one of those things. It predates that, so it gets included. So in the event, though, that there's a change, like right now with I'm not sure if you guys have heard of this, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it, COVID-19 or something. It's, yeah, there it is. That's a pretty significant change, right? So one of the things that you can do is you can force, even if you're in a proposal, you can amend the terms of the proposal. But what it does is it reopens that can of worms. So what can happen is the creditors then have 45 days to vote on the new terms of the proposal. And if they say no, the unfortunate thing is you don't get to go back to that other proposal because you've essentially destroyed it and put a new one on the table.
Okay. Next question. A person is currently in a consumer proposal for 2 years and then something happens in their life, divorce, etc., and they want to add what current debt they have to the consumer proposal. Do they have to file a new consumer proposal? Can the current one be amended? Is there any time limit when a person can amend it? And how would this show on their credit bureau?
Whew,
I
that's a
just
good question. That is a good question. So you can't add new ones, right? So there is there's an interesting sort of argument, a perspective I shared with one of my colleagues named Andrew Basilevsky, and the question really is, does the act tell you what you can do or what you can't do? So the act is silent on filing another consumer proposal while you're in a consumer proposal. Now, so what I mean by that is, if you're in a consumer proposal and it annuls, right, which means you don't make your payments and it annuls, you can't file another one. It's clear on that. But if it hasn't annulled yet, there's nothing to say that you can't file another one. Now, the government, when we've done this, have shaken their proverbial fist at us and said, hey, you can't do this, but you can. It just creates a pretty big confusion on their end. Often, what can be done is you would file what's called a Division 1 proposal. So it's similar to a consumer proposal, but it restarts it's under a separate division, and it would restart that date. So that would be I guess the first part of the question. I'm afraid
lengthening out the first proposal.
It could, yeah. Yeah, because a proposal can only be, it's for a maximum period of 5 years. So if you filed another one within the middle, it's not really contemplated under the act that would happen. But if you filed it under Division 1, that is contemplated and it would stand, yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted. You were going to say something else there.
I forgot the rest of the question. I was so
it was, how does it affect your credit?
So yeah, so a consumer proposal puts your credit to an R7. And you know, what's interesting about the credit bureaus is, of course, they're private businesses, right? So how they report is how they report. So I used to say it would be an R7 for 3 years after you're done, but as I understand it, last year they updated this, and thank goodness I'm surrounded by a great many colleagues that know a lot more than I do. And it's on your credit report for a maximum of 6 years, and it's 3 years after you're done if it's under the 5, I believe is what it is. Taz, you can probably correct me.
Well, I've seen them on there for 7. Like, so even though they say it's not a science, it's an art.
It's true. It's true. And so anything, and as you probably know, you can dispute what's on your credit report, right? And that's something. There's a whole industry actually that's grown out of how to correct your credit report, and I imagine it's just going to grow more because there's going to be more and more things that are on reports.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. So this is a question from Melissa, who's here right now. If you own a condo, but you can't afford to live in it, that's where she's at right now. She's been renting out the property for many years because she can't afford it. Does that mean she cannot qualify for a proposal?
No, you totally can. So what's interesting about a consumer proposal is that just to give you an idea of the madness of what our world's like right now. In 2009, the Bankruptcy Act was amended. Now, that was a long time ago. I remember it kind of like yesterday. My 20s, I don't remember, but 2009, I remember quite well. So what happened in 2009 is they amended the definition of what a consumer debtor is. So it used to be that a consumer debtor was someone that owed less than $75,000, excluding the amount on their home. Now, we are so indebted as a people, they increased that to $250,000, excluding the amounts on your home. So provided that your mortgage is under that your total debt's under $250,000, you can file a consumer proposal. So that's that on a very quick one-off. Now, earlier I was saying that an exemption in your principal residence, you have to be living in it. Well, if you've just left it and you're planning on returning back to it, an argument can be said why you should be entitled to that exemption and why you should be able to file it under a Division 2. And if you're dealing with a trustee that's refusing to do that, that is their prerogative. They can say, I'm not comfortable with this. I would encourage you to speak with another trustee. And at that, make sure you're talking to a trustee. There's a whole other industry that's stepped in to say, hey, I can get you the right trustee. they can. They'll get you their trustee that they use and they'll charge you a bunch of money to do it. Even if that is the case that you wouldn't be able to do that, there's still a Division 1 proposal. So there's always a way to do a proposal. It's just the different method in which you'd be doing it, Erin.
I think what you're really truly saying now is when you are choosing everything is an argument, right? It's sort of like and not an argument in like a fight, but just you have to have somebody on your side who's going to argue on your behalf and understands enough about why it is in their best interest to accept the proposal. So that's really what you're looking for. You need to look for somebody who understands the full scope of your finances, who you trust with all of that information, and who you think is going to really help you, move forward. It's not about anything else except for like, does this make sense? And
Absolutely.
How can your trustee explain that so that it does make sense to the creditor?
100%. 100%. And here's the other thing that's important, just because when we say like someone on our side, this is one of the difficulties and where the wedge can get driven in between the relationship. We tend to function very sort of binary with things. You're either with me or you're against me. And a trustee is neither with their client or with the creditors. They stand in the middle. So the way I often will refer to it is like if you say, whose side is the police officer on? Immediately where I go to is getting pulled over on the side of the road when I'm late to see my kids. And I'm like, clearly not on my kid's side. And he wouldn't listen to, no matter how much I tried to explain to him, right? Well, he's on the side of the law. I shouldn't have been speeding, right? The trustee, we're on the side of what the law is. Now, the law is, with these things, there is some interpretation. This one is rehabilitation, which is a huge chunk of what your program is, and what you're doing is you're bringing that rehabilitative aspect into the community. The second principle is the control and distribution of the assets. The third one is to investigate, because we can move things back. But the fourth principle is to promote faith within the system. So what I would encourage anyone, if they're asking a question and the person you're talking to doesn't know what the answer is, that's okay, but they should be able to get you an answer. If someone says to you, I wouldn't worry about that, just don't worry about that. That's, maybe not the best answer. And try to know what the outcomes are, as far as I'm concerned.
Very true, very true. Christina says, a common question from people is, how do insolvency firms make money? Do your clients pay you?
Super interesting question. So there's actually, so the way it would work is, and there's a directive on, it's called Directive 16. I think they put an R on the end to confuse us. But basically what it is the trustee or insolvency firms, they're paid from the estates that they administer. So what that means is the very first person that gets paid, so let's just look at a bankruptcy first. If there's a bankruptcy, the first money that comes out, it pays the funeral and testimony accounts. The second one, it pays the government if they have to take over, because we've been doing such a terrible job, understandably. The third one, we get paid. So arguably people aren't dying that much, and the government's not stepping in. So the first person to get paid is the trustee, and it's from the assets in the estate. Now, what's important to understand about this is that although a trustee is an officer of the court and we get paid from the assets in the estate, we're also a private business. So we can say, I'm not willing to take this on, right? And what can happen is they say, I'm not willing to take it on unless you, as a citizen, fund this amount in, because I should be paid a trustee fee in relation to this. Now, that's a colloquial expression, a fee, right? There is no fee. What you're doing is you're funding the estate a certain amount of money that the trustee requires that you fund into it. Now, no matter what's going to happen, there's always going to be a certain amount of money that would hit your estate, because on the end of a social insurance number, the trustee's license number gets tagged. So any tax refunds for the year come in, and your GST and carbon tax come in. And the GST will continue even when you're discharged until there's sufficient money in there before it triggers a dividend to your creditors, which is about $1,600. So if you're talking to and that's a first-time bankruptcy, a second-time bankruptcy, again, a trustee might say, I'm not willing to do this unless you pay me X number of dollars. You might want to go talk to another trustee that'll do it for the assets that are in the estate. Now, when it comes to a proposal, precisely the same scenario. The trustee gets paid a percentage of the money that's in there. So the trustee gets $1,500 plus 20% of the monies. So the terms of a proposal just require that you offer to the creditors a greater sum of money than what they would recover in a bankruptcy scenario.
Right, or make it work. I think, you know, when you talk about the order of the payments like that, it can be off-putting for some people in terms of like, I don't understand, like, what's this? It's not like there's an out-of-pocket. You know, you're not saying to them, I'll do this for you if you give me, you know, $2,000. It's not like that.
No, but to be clear, Erin, there's let's say someone comes in and they say, I have no ability to make these payments. There'll be an attachment to the wage that would come in, right? But there may be some trustees that say, that's $1,600 that I'm going to get from a tax refund. That's not enough for my business model. So I want you to pay an additional $2,000 at a small rate. I'll figure it out. We'll pay it $200 over the next, $225 over the next 9 months. Now, what's interesting is that's not going to just go to their fee. That's actually going to trigger a dividend to their creditors or to the individual's creditors. So it's not really a fee, and I'm not here to rant about how offended I am by that kind of behavior, but certainly welcome me back another time and I can rant on for a couple hours.
Well, I think it's okay to say. I think it's okay to just be upfront of like that. You know, this is how we get paid. This is how some people get paid. It's just like in
Yeah.
you know, when you're going to buy a house in real estate, the lawyer actually gets paid before anybody else. Like people often think, oh, you know, what's the exchange of realtor fees and who gets paid when? But it's very clear in your real estate document. The lawyer gets paid, then the lawyer pays out the realtors and whatever else. And if there's any shortfall, then you're responsible. So it's just sort of like, it's just explaining the order in which things get paid. And you might have a lawyer, you're doing a real estate transaction that's like, oh, I'm going to take 10,000 cash to close, and you might have another realtor that's going to take 1,500. So you just have to buyer beware like anything else, and just really find out what it is you are going to be expected to do, and whether or not that sits right with you, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so Justin says to estimate equity in a house, is the city assessment used, or do you need an appraisal or a CMA from a realtor?
It's a great question. It used to be the case. The position I would take years ago was that the city would be focused on taxing you as much as possible, so that should be a reasonable estimation of what the value of the home is. Certainly had my hand slapped a few times for taking that liberal approach. You could use an appraiser. Usually what we would do is we use a program called Purview, which is very much like a CMA, and that's what we would use. And if the client says, I don't really believe what that is, they could go get a realtor to get it done. But at that stage, I would suggest if you're concerned about it, you want to get an appraisal, because what's important to understand, particularly if you're going into a bankruptcy, is that the difference between a bankruptcy and a proposal is in a bankruptcy, the assets vest with the trustee, and they don't actually, even if they're exempted, they vest with the trustee, and it's they get returned if you can't distribute them, they get returned at the end of the bankruptcy. And there's some case law that suggests that the home can be revalued at the end. Now, I say that not to freak anybody out, but this happened in Alberta in 2005, and it largely was settled because it started to say, well, when did the trustee deal with it, right? Again, nobody defined deal with it, so so the can is not fully stuck. But there's a case out in Ontario, and it's called LePage, or for the more, some people say LePage. I don't really know how to say it. I say LePage. CRA was actually able to attach to the value of the home going up, and the court called it after acquired property. Now, this is the big difference between a bankruptcy and a proposal. Is a bankruptcy is a certainty of a process, but an uncertainty of an outcome, whereas a proposal is a certainty of a process and a certainty of an outcome. So although you're paying more money in a proposal, the cost associated with that, with the certainty of that, and if your income increases during the period of the proposal, your creditors can't have any of that. That's why a proposal is mostly chosen by consumers nowadays.
Right. Okay. If someone declares bankruptcy, is there a percentage of the money owing does the creditor expects to get? I think what she's saying is there a percentage, if someone declares bankruptcy, is there an absolute percentage of money that the creditor expects?
So yeah, what's interesting about that, so bankruptcy is the percentage of money that they get is not on what the debt is. It's based actually upon the income that the individual makes and the amount of people that are dependent on that individual. And every year there's a thing released called the superintendent standards. So it sets an amount that people are allowed to make. And then there's a math calculation that's done that says, okay, you make this much, this is the guideline, this is your percentage of the income, you have to pay this. And the amount of time you have to pay that for is directly proportionate to the times you have exercised your right under the Bankruptcy Act to go bankrupt. Hopefully only once, maybe twice, 3 times you actually end up before the court. So it's not so much a percent, like eventually it will turn into a percentage going back, but it's important for the consumer or for, for you to consider not so much the percentage of what's going to go back to them, but what's the percentage out of your pool of money that's you're going to be putting into the bankruptcy, and the trustee will be able to help you. And what's important to understand about the trustee, like when I say the trustee, I know some people say, I want, like if they contact a trustee firm, they'll say, I want to talk to the trustee. The trustee is a corporate entity, right? So I am the trustee, but there's a corporate entity called Bromwich and Smith, and I've got I think 105 colleagues. I've got 9 other trustees. So you will meet a trustee eventually, but mostly it'll be our colleagues gathering this information to get to that. I think what you're looking at is there a percentage that the creditors will take and settle on a consumer proposal? And I think that's really what the nub is. And you'll talk to some trustees and some people will say, oh, well, the Royal Bank will only take 30% and this one will take this. The fact of the matter is we've served probably 20,000 people in our, while Bromwich's Fifth has been around since 2002. And I could go back and get a percentage for each of these creditors, but the reality is times change and it's really based upon the ability to make, the ability of what they would recover in a bankruptcy. So provided that you're offering something more to them, they'll usually accept it. From our side of the fence, 88% of the time what we put forward is accepted. 12% we have meetings, and 98% of the time we can get a settlement on the proposal.
Right. Great question by Justin along those lines. Is child support or alimony taken into consideration in a consumer proposal?
Awesome question. So if you're paying it, of course it's taken off as what's referred to as a non-discretionary expense because you have no choice in that. Now, if you're receiving it, it depends on. And again, I'll talk out of this side of my mouth here. So yeah, and that's your money. That's the person's money. That's one argument, right? The other side says, no, that's not your money. That's the children's money. Okay, so I argue out of this one. Bromwich and Smith argues out of this one. That's your children's money. So although you have to report it, it gets put in the other category as a child's money. So for example, let's say you make $2,000 and you get $2,000 child support, family income is $4,000. Let's say the guideline for your family is $3,000. You have to pay half of anything over that. So that would be $1,000, half is $500, but of that half, it adjusts to the percentage of the money you brought in. So again, halved again. I know that was my math skills. This is why I was sent over this way from the guidance counselor. I wanted to be a dancer, but.
Did you? Let me see. Show us one move. You just want one move.
I can't, I'm not a dancer. I'm more of a wallflower.
Okay. Yeah. Question: what happens to your tax returns when you file insolvency? I think if the person who sent me that could just clarify if they mean their refund. Is that what you're asking? What happens to your tax? Or just I
would imagine it's that. Okay. Yeah. So again, with a bankruptcy, the vesting provisions of a bankruptcy vest the tax return or the refund to the trustee. In a proposal, it doesn't. Now, again, this is an important thing. If you're talking to a trustee, right, they're going to get that, right? But they may say to you, well, I I'm not sure if I'm going to get that. So I want you to guarantee that I'm going to recover this $1,600 or whatever number they want, right? And it should only be $1,600. And you should say to them, will I get my money back if I pay this to you? If I pay this money during this time frame, will you return that money to me? And there's an ability to do that, and there's actually a decision because we use it all the time. We're able to refund money back on that. But if you went bankrupt, you would lose that tax refund.
Okay. Talk to me about. This is my question. What is some of like the emotional things people can expect to go doing a consumer proposal or bankruptcy? Because I think that's the thing that holds people back from making a decision. And
yeah, so like huge judgment. We will judge you so badly. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's one of the things probably one of the craziest things is that when you're so used to stress, you're stress. To have that gone is a bizarre feeling. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the expression, the devil you know. There's a certain quality about when you're looking at making change. I know what I did yesterday is at the peak of our humbleness. What we want today is what we had yesterday. We don't want anything less, and largely we don't even know what we had yesterday. But one of the things that the emotional experiences that people will go through, sort of disbelief is one word, right? Because it's like it seems. Do you know the story of the Sneetches? Have you ever heard of this story?
Dr. Seuss speeches?
Dr. Seuss, yeah, the Sneetches. So Professor McMonkey McBean comes to the beach with the Sneetches, and some of them have the stars and some of them don't have the stars. And so what he does is the ones with the stars, they don't let the ones without the stars hang out with them. So what he does is he creates a star-on machine. And so everyone gets stars, and the ones that had the stars is like, what's going on? So they want the stars off. And eventually they do all this until all their money's gone. And then he runs off with it. I met a young woman years ago, and she said to me, Shawn, bankruptcy trustees, you're just like Professor McMonkey McBean. You just get rid of the debt, and the cycle just starts again. And I said, well, absolutely, if you don't change things for yourself, right? And that doesn't mean that you have to, like in the sense of like, never make these choices again, because we make choices based upon the best information that we have at the time. And as much as, we'd like to, if I could go back to my 18-year-old self and give him advice, it'd be like, hey, man, you don't know everything. I'm from the future. You learned a few things. So, open your ears and widen your eyes. Yeah. The greatest thing that I think a lot of people go through, though, is the sense of euphoria and acceptance. And also this sense of paying it forward in a lot of ways. If you look online, for us, one of the big things that we as a people want to, or as a firm, we want to ensure that we normalize the conversation of debt within the community. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to be able to come here and speak of this, because the more we can speak about this, the better off the community gets. And so a lot of the times, the feeling is actually one of like, I had no idea this could happen, and I want to tell people about this. So if you ever go online and look at reviews, people will share their story. There's a tremendous euphoria in reading someone else's story and sharing their story. But the other thing that they feel, to be frank with you, Erin, there's no more excuses. Sometimes we get up and we're like, once, if only it was nice out, I would go do this. If only this, I would do this. And sometimes what we do is we have our debt and we're like, well, as soon as I take care of that, then I'll do this. As soon as I do this, then I'm going to do some yoga. As soon as it's like, nope, okay, it's all done. Now what are you going to do? You have no excuses. You have the whole world is your oyster, and it's a beautiful, scary place to be. But it's one that you will, the jeans will fit, to be sure, and you'll look good in them.
It's like let's start dating again. The emotional piece is such a big one because we have a Facebook group for the people who are going through our Get the Hell Out of Debt program, and I still cry every time somebody pays off a debt, even if it's a credit card or whatever. I cannot help it. My eyeballs leak. My best friend had a baby, and I was like, aw, cute baby. No emotion whatsoever. But somebody
Yeah.
pays off a credit card that they've had for 10 years, and I cry. Like, because I know how difficult it is and how hard it is. And I know that feeling of relief.
Yeah.
So I think that's such a good point. But yes, you're right. It does sort of free up this whole thing, because you can get so focused on, how am I going to pay this, the debt, the overwhelm, the whatever. And the minute it's gone, it's like, you sort of look around, you can like smell colors now, like things look better. The world
Yeah.
gets so much better. Justin says, can a lit offer lump sum settlement to creditors instead of monthly payments? As an example, if a family member offers a lump sum of money, or if someone can access equity from a home.
Justin knows his stuff. Hey, that's a licensed insolvency trustee for the uninitiated.
Lingo.
It has two thumbs up and has an acronym at the end of his name. Hey, Skye. So absolutely, yeah. In fact, one of the great things about lump sums that are going to creditors, here's what I would suggest. Make sure that if that's the case and you're dealing with a trustee that's doing this, I will request the money up front. But a third part, you have to make sure there's a third party guarantee signed, because otherwise what can happen is, if the money's sitting in the trust account, there can be an argument put forward by the superintendent of bankruptcy that says, no, that belongs to the debtor, right? But you can absolutely do that. You can put lump sums forward. You can even put it through, not that I'd recommend doing some of this, but you could redeem your RRSPs. Like, you could file a proposal for a smaller amount, redeem RRSPs, and pay that proposal off. The thing is, you got to really balance out, is that worth it to you? So if you have a family member that's doing that and they're liquid, awesome. But if that family member is using a line of credit, I would far be it for me to tell anyone how to live their life, but I will. I feel like I'm invited to. I would say definitely don't do something like that. And the reason being is, a proposal, there's no interest, right? So now again, people are like, I just want this over with, and I get it. I totally get you just want it behind you, but it's not going to be behind you, because then you're going to say, I just want it off my credit bureau. I just want this. I just want this. Today's the first day of the rest of your life. Yeah.
And I think we just have to get rid of a lot of the shame and stuff that comes up with all the, that feeling of wanting to get over with, is because there's shame there. And so when we can address that core issue, then it's just there. And it's like you're left-handed, or you're left-handed forever, but this isn't going to be forever. You're into wearing red jeans that are button fly, and that will pass one day too, right? So Justin, I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're not. I was a bad example. Okay. Another question here. Regarding folks who might already be in a debt restructuring program and attempting to navigate the COVID crisis, any advice on how to move forward in such unprecedented times when they're already in a more vulnerable financial state?
That's a great question. I mean, lots and lots and lots and lots of people have been reaching out to us that are in proposals or in bankruptcies right now. So I guess it really depends on what the program is, right? So one of the things that's when it comes down to proposals, there's a certain time frames, and you have to be making payments in connection with those proposals. Now, certain things can be written into the terms of the proposal if you've used well, certainly, like if you use someone like us, we have certain language in that allows us to adjust things in the event that there's not inspectors. So we're able to actually do all that stuff on our own. There's an ability, in the event that your trustee chose not to use that, or didn't have the foresight to incorporate that kind of language, that trustee may feel compelled that they're required to sign an annulment. But afterwards, there's an ability that you can actually have a proposal restarted. It's within a 30-day time frame, or through a court order later on. And I cannot imagine that the court is going to not allow you to restart this, especially considering the court's not even open right now. And quite rightly so. I'm not suggesting that they should be. But just like with anything, what you should do, talk to people. Reach out and talk. The last thing, if you're running late for lunch, right? Nobody wants to make that call that says, I'm running late for lunch, particularly now since you've found the one restaurant that's open, and you've got a reservation and you're waiting there. But you got to make that call, and you got to be able to say, this is what it is. And I think, Erin, what's really important is that we really have to be, and when I say honest with ourselves, I don't mean to suggest that we're not being honest with ourselves in the sense that we're lying to ourselves, but are we having a genuine, proper reflection on, is it this COVID situation? Or is that one other thing that I'm saying, this is why I shouldn't be moving down this direction, if you follow me, right? So there's debt repayment programs where you're paying back 100% of the debt at a 5% interest rate. Well, you could go in some cases, you could be going into bankruptcy and paying $1,600 and be done. Now, I know you might say, well, I don't want to go bankrupt. Well, then file a proposal. You file a small proposal and at adjustable rates over a period of time that it gets it behind you. But again, the best thing, make an inventory and talk to the creditor or the provider of the plan that you're in right now.
I think that's always the biggest thing, is always taking that inventory is going to be, I mean, we teach that in our debt programs, but we also teach it in our wealth programs. When people graduate from the Get the Hell debt and they go build wealth, you're taking inventory all the time.
Oh yeah.
You might as well, right? It's avoiding it doesn't make it go away. That's and facing into it isn't fun, but once you've done it, then you know, and you can just adjust as you go. And so being the person who calls when you're running late, that's the person everybody respects and appreciates, right? Being the person who calls when you screw up or you drop a vase or you break grandma's china or something, you know what I mean? Like being the one that's just deal with it and being upfront with it, it makes everything easier in the long run for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Being conscious of everybody's time. I have one question here. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to stay on. I don't know how much time you have, but there's some of us who can totally stay on and make sure everybody gets their questions answered.
Sure, absolutely.
But here's one more that I promised that I would get to today. She said, it was about corporations. Where did I put it? Oh, here we go. What happens in terms of corporate proposal? I'll read the whole thing. My partner in life and business and I, as well as a few of our friends, are in this boat where we're looking for more information on corporations and what our best options are, or even a solid referral to someone who could help us with getting advice in terms of a corporate insolvency trustee.
So the important thing to understand sort of about with corporations is that a corporation is a separate legal entity from you, or from, yeah, actually from you as well, from everybody. So the debts of the corporation are not the responsibility of the shareholders or the directors or the officers. The only time the debts of the corporation become the responsibility is in the event that the officers or the directors agree to be bound by the terms of it, right? So, and you go to the bank, and the bank, opens up says, "Oh yeah, of course, we'd love to loan your corporation money." Remember, a corporation is a person, right? This thing is just incorporated 7 days ago, and the bank's going to give it $30,000. They're not giving it to the corporation. They're going to tell you it's in the corporation. You're going to get the corporation card, but you're going to be personally guaranteed for it. Okay, so that's the first thing that's super important that we understand about something like this, is that oftentimes people think they need information on corporations, but they don't need it on corporations because it's what's going to drop onto them. So the other way it would go on to them if they haven't agreed to it, the other way is if you had employees and you were acting as a director and you were withholding their source deductions, so as an employee, you negotiate a wage, you never get that wage because they always withhold some of it and they give it to the government. Well, that portion that they're supposed to give to the government, it's called a deemed trust. So that'll fall upon the directors and the officers. So if that's the case, again, it's them. So it goes back to the real answer to this goes back to the question earlier about how does a trustee get paid? So a trustee is going to get paid from the assets in that corporation. So if that corporation has no assets, why would you put the corporation into bankruptcy? Now you might say, well, because it's the right thing to do. Well, fantastic, it's the right thing to do. Who's going to pay for it? You? right? Like, and now again, you might talk to a trustee that says, well, if you're going to do this, you should have gone in business. That is not our role, as far as I'm concerned, is not to moralize the requirement of what to do in the situation. So with this individual, although they may want, they may be thinking, I need to speak about a corporate bankruptcy, really what they need to assess, they need to do the inventory and say, what am I personally responsible for here? What did I agree to? And then from there can look and say, should I be, how do I mitigate that? If nothing's there, then it's a question of, are there any assets? Because if you go talk to a trustee, they're going to want to know what the assets are. Or they're going to say to you, okay, Erin, love to help you out. I'm going to need a $10,000 retainer. It's a guarantee, and if I get money from other sources, I'm going to pay it towards that. Well, where are they going to get the money from the sources? Save and accept the assets. Does that help?
Sense in that I don't think she's on the call, but so in her case, would it be best then just to, even if it's a wash, then just shut it down, like an accountant?
Yeah. I think probably the best thing I would suggest, she gives our office a call and does an inventory, like arguably for herself, to see what she's tied in with, and then I'm here, Rainbow Bright, nice.
Business credit, okay. So you're on the right track there. So she's gonna have to do inventory of the assets and see what she's personally responsible for, and then make that call.
Yeah, and usually what happens. Usually what will happen with that is the creditor will actually have like a general security agreement on top of all of that stuff. So they can appoint a receiver in place. But even if it's not showing up on your, like, I would really look at speaking with the creditor itself. Is there any personal guaranteed signed? Notwithstanding this not showing up on your credit report, did you sign anything? Now, if you personally guaranteed it as well, you would need to have it witnessed by a lawyer, is usually how it would go, unless you're actually a co-signer on it, right? So it's worth looking at that.
Okay, good. Didn't guarantee anything. Oh, good. Okay.
You're very welcome.
Anybody have any other questions before we wind down? Any questions at all? Just want to give you the opportunity. I know sometimes you get off the call and you're like, oh, I should have asked this, right? That's usually what happens. So I'll give you our contact information just so that you have it. It's just our website. So if you want to ask any questions ever, you totally can. Look, it's not even working, so you don't get it, actually, as a matter of fact. I'll type it out here for you. This is Bromwich and Smith, and your information is right on there, so you're okay. You can find out anything you want to know. There's lots of great people that work there that can answer all kinds of questions, and I committed to Taz last month that we're going to do this once a month, right through till we get through this COVID thing, right through we get through, you know, if the economy is tough even long after this, we're going to once a month, we're just going to have an open, honest conversation about debt. We're going to talk to our friend Richard Moxley in a little bit, coming up in a few weeks, to talk about credit and that side of things. We're going to talk about all kinds of things when it comes to the money and debt and all of the things. So you can find me at getthehelloutofdebt.com. You can find Shawn and his amazing team at bromwichandsmith.com. And if you have any questions, you let us know, but I'll hang online here for about 2 more minutes. And otherwise, the rest of you can log off and enjoy at least a little bit of sunshine if you're still on the West Coast, and try and enjoy some warm weather. Thanks for being here, everybody.